End of carefree days. My carefree summer days ended abruptly in September on the first day after Labor Day, as my mother marched me off to the local schoolhouse. My introduction to the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, came as a big surprise. There was no physical education, no woodwork, no cooking, no field trips to soften the blow of losing my boyhood freedom. The familiar term strap took on a whole new meaning, as Dad's razor strap was not nearly as vicious as Miss Foster's strap, which was a strip of belting around 12 to 15 inches long and about 1 to 1.5 inches wide. Applied to an outstretched hand, or depending on one's crime, maybe two hands, this instrument of torture was very effective. When justice was executed with two or more straps to the hand, it seemed excessive since one could not feel anything after the first hit. Aside from the red, stinging hands which smarted for ages, the belt had the therapeutic effect of stimulating the circulation in one's hands. Speaking from first-hand as well as second-hand experience, I'm somewhat of an expert on the subject. When Miss Foster was unable to catch the culprit who dared to speak in class, she would shout, "Class, stand up and hold out your hands." She then proceeded to strap the entire class. Either Miss Foster was ahead of her time and using psychology, letting the class get revenge when school was out, or she was building calluses in our hands to prepare us for the mine work. Once, a girl's ringlet proved too much temptation for me, and I succumbed and dipped it in my black ink bottle and blotted it without her knowledge. Great fun until my act was uncovered. It only happened once. Although the little girl's name was blotted from my memory, the punishment remains vivid. During my school years, Carlo and Billy seemed to have more than their share of problems. Conflict with our principal, Mr. Harper, and the teachers seemed perpetual. Opportunity for trouble came knocking when Billy's sister Annie, who was in nurse's training, came on holidays. Armed with Annie's obstetrics textbook, Billy educated his fellow students at the back of the classroom. What an education! I learned more in 15 minutes about human physiology than in all my previous years. The vibes from the back of the room were so great that the teacher came back to investigate. Billy, caught again, was marched home, leaving behind grateful learners. Trouble did not contain itself to the classroom. In the midst of our sports day competition, some students started yelling, "Run! Run!" Looking up, we saw a huge Torino tire rolling down the hill towards the field. Torino tires were not your average vehicle tires. They were about 6 feet high and weighed hundreds of pounds. Herb Riddle, the cat mechanic for Mannix, said one cost over $2,000. A Ford or a Chevrolet vehicle cost less than $2,000 at that time. It was huge, and when it hit the ditch, it bounced about 10 feet in the air, came down, and continued across the baseball diamond, smashing a 2 by 10-foot plank fence like it was a row of matchsticks. It finally came to rest after it bounced into a school wall. Surprised to see no visible damage, our amazement was short-lived when someone cried, "Look inside!" The wall of plaster in the girls' washing room was on the floor. They tried to catch the perpetrators, but they were long gone. The usual suspects were under suspicion, Carlo and Billy. 50 years later, at a Catamount reunion, the truth came to light. "Carlo," I said, "tell me the truth. Did you and Billy Cap roll the tire down the hill?" He replied, "Jack, the truth is, the day before the sports day, Mr. Harper and I had a real argument. He was so mad that he banned me from sports day. I yelled back at him, 'Fine, I'll have my own sports day,' and I walked out. It was Billy Ferguson, not Billy Cap, who was with me. When asked how they got the monster-sized tire up the hill, Carlo lifted his beer bottle for another nip and replied, 'With great difficulty.'" After all these years, I was rather pleased to find out who had rolled the tire down the hill. Soon after this information was obtained, I met Bill Ferguson, my cousin. With a broad grin, I remarked, "It was you and Carlo who rolled the tire down the hill, eh?" Bill looked at me strangely and said, "It wasn't Carlo and I who rolled the tire down the hill. It was Billy Kopinski and I. Carlo had nothing to do with it. The men up at the pit liked Bill Cap, and when he asked for the old tire, they said take it." This was a startling revelation. With our memories deteriorating as they were, I wondered if Carlo, having blamed so often for the incident, was ready to believe he really was responsible for rolling that tire down the hill. All I know for sure is that 2 of those 3 were the culprits. My early school years were marked by thoughtless behavior. One sunny day, I went over to the hill onto my cousin Evelyn's place on one of my occasional visits. While sitting on the front steps with her beautifully dressed daughter Arlene, I decided to perform some magic. With my magnifying glass, I began to burn holes and channels in her dress. Arlene was suitably surprised and impressed. Evelyn, having just finished sewing the dress, was also surprised, but truly not impressed. There was enough material available for sewing, but the money to buy it was very scarce. Forgiving does not necessarily mean forgetting. They still remind me of my delinquent behavior. Dory Owen, my stepbrother Ronnie's wife, was another victim of my thoughtless behavior. When climbing the hill to my home with 2 bags of groceries in her arms, Dory happened to bend over to look at something on the ground. As fate would have it, I was a short distance behind her with my slingshot and a marble. The temptation was too great. What else could I do? The marble hit its target. With groceries flying everywhere, I took off at high speed. Dory, fueled by rage, was right behind me, up the hill, through the pines, and right into the muskeg. Had she caught me, I might not be writing this book to this day. At times, she still brings up the incident. The fact that Mother saw what happened through the porch window and could not stop laughing also hurt her feelings. Another frustration, she could not show anyone the bruise. As fall came upon us, the leaves would fall by the thousands. We would pile them up and jump in them, or pile them on the road and let the cars scatter them. Some children built a big pile on the road downtown one night. And there were not that many cars in town, so we just watched from the outside of the drugstore with anticipation as a Chevy sedan approached. In order to thrill the expectant spectators, the driver gave it a little extra gas. All of a sudden, boom! The front end of the car bounced up and the hood flew open. Somebody had buried a log under the leaves. What a shock! The driver got out of the car, and so livid he was stuttering, "Who did it? What a stupid thing to do! Didn't you know how dangerous that stunt was?" Nobody present knew who the culprits were, but we had a pretty good idea. We were really surprised and relieved to see the hood close and the car drive away. By the time all the leaves had fallen, it was Thanksgiving Day, and we celebrated with a home-prepared dinner consisting of turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, Brussels sprouts, cranberry sauce, and gravy. By the time the dessert was served, we could barely swallow another mouthful of food. Most of our family and sometimes friends would be present. Mother's homemade cooking brought a sense of comfort and affluence to our humble home. With dinner over and the mess cleaned up, we would visit, play games, or just rest until it was time to go to the community dance. For us children, it was Halloween for which we were waiting. Even in freezing temperatures, we would brave the outdoors to trick or treat. Our costumes and masks were homemade and had a very short lifespan. It wouldn't be too long before our papier-mâché masks would soften and become distorted from our breath. The 2 eye holes were never in the right place, causing one to trip and bump into things, but it was still fun. Other trick-or-treaters would let one know who was giving out the best treats. This saved us time as we chose our route according to this valuable information. As our goodie bags started to get heavy, we would wind our way home to sort out our treats. Getting home was always the roughest part of the night, especially when you were dying to go to the bathroom. After undressing and warming up, we would check out our booty. We always seemed to have a disappointing number of apples. The ones that were bruised from being dropped and bumped, Mother used for pies or sauce. Luckily, razor blades and apples were not a concern back then. The rest of the booty was sorted out from okay to best. One year, we put our hands in our bags to find a big sticky surprise. Somebody was a failure at making popcorn balls. The balls came apart and stuck to everything, including the bag. The goodie bag of choice was a flour sack. Those multi-purpose bags had many uses, from good pillow slips to girls' underslips. What one became too old to trick-or-treat? Well, they just played tricks or went on masquerading parties. Many an outhouse was pushed over as a pastime. Real exciting, huh? Especially when one heard a scream as it was being rocked. One Halloween, a group of pranksters decided to move the section crew's outhouse. It was on the trail that led to the Two's house on the hillside in Luscar. The nights there were so dark that one couldn't see one's hand in front of one's face. Those using the path would hold out one hand to feel the outhouse on the way up the path in order to get their bearings. Although the outhouse was only moved about 3 or 4 feet back of the pathway, the impact was devastating. You guessed right, a short time later calls for help were heard from down below. Poor Tom Reed had fallen down the hole and into the smelly quagmire beneath. Mr. Toos was furious as they had to go up and help Tom out. The trap which had been set for somebody else captured Tom on his way to the Halloween dance. Unfortunately, he was wearing a new suit and new shoes that had to be removed and destroyed. If it was not bad enough losing a new suit of clothing, news of Tom's mishap spread around town, and for some time, people who knew what happened would rub it in by holding their noses when they met him. Another well-known Halloween prank was to tie a slipknot rope around a doorknob and knock. When the person opened the door, one would pull it shut. They would usually pull it open again, and one would pull it shut again. Like baiting a bear, once the victim was riled up, one could release the slipknot and run. Fully aggravated, the victim would pull hard. Finding no resistance, they would usually land on their backsides. Since we had to create our own fun, Catamount was a place full of practical jokers. Another trick was to cover a chimney with a square of wood and rope tied to it. With the smoke backed up in the house, the doors would fly open and the occupants would evacuate. In the meantime, they would have pulled the wood off, leaving the puzzled homeowners trying to figure out what had happened. One group of pranksters jacked up the rear wheel of a car and put it on a block, just enough to clear the ground. The driver came out, started the car, put it in gear, and sat there puzzled as the car revved and refused to move. It was great fun for everybody, except the party on whom the prank was played. Another prank that will always be remembered by those present is one that occurred one morning after Halloween. When we arrived at school, there was a large group of students around the flagpole looking up. On top of the pole was a garbage can and a metal gate at full mast. The janitor was uncertain as to how he should get it down in order to put up the Canadian ensign. Some wise soul loosened the rope while everyone ran to safety. The school was a preferred target for practical jokes. It was almost always a Halloween tradition to block the school entrance with outhouses. Although not imaginative, it was a common choice of prank. Feeling a little more creative, one year the older boys took the mercantile delivery wagon and reassembled it on the roof of the mercantile. The proprietors searched everywhere for it. A few days later, somebody happened to look up and found the stolen wagon on the roof. Those suspected of putting it there were sent to get it down. Practical jokes of all sorts were not uncommon in Catamount.